Good morning. Can you hear me back there? Okay, great. Welcome to our panel discussion today. Thank you for coming. This millennial cohort demo or wave is having a huge and irreversible and highly visible impact on housing, commerce, media, across the board. But we are not entirely clear yet on what the implications are for politics and public policy. And today we'll find out quite a bit about that, thanks to George Donnelly putting together a remarkable panel. The program today is going to flow like this. First are my introductory remarks, which are about 85% done. Then we're going to show you a video about the State House News Service. That's our parent and sister company. I'm very proud of that organization. They've been around 100 years. And in fact, Antonio, we hit the magic button that shows the I don't want to break the machine.
State House News Service for a very long time. In fact, I've been reading it since like the 80s.
Read it first thing in the morning on my smartphone. I read it on the way in on the train, and it's on my desktop, on my home page, right there on my computer in the office. And of course, I'm doing the very thing going home.
State House News Service, I've been reading it since April 12, 1997, when I got sworn in as state representative for the Southern District. Read it for many years, still read it. It comes to my phone, my computer.
Covering politics in Massachusetts has never been easy, but nowadays it's near impossible at all from only one person. So when you're a client of the State House News Service, it's like you've got eyes and ears in every corner of this building and beyond.
The State House News covers everything under the sun, things that I didn't even know that we actually did in government.
And the other thing that goes on at the State House News is just how quickly they get things. I had the experience this morning. Somebody called me first thing. Did you see State House News this morning?
Anybody who works in my administration will tell you that it's not unusual to get forward a story. And reference somebody who's in the story and say you need somebody to follow. There's so much there that gives you an insight into what's going on in the world of politics, not necessarily on the gossip side per se, although some of that probably that as well, but really on the issues. What are the issues of the day?
We use it as a credible source of information as we tout to our members, what's happening actually on Beacon Hill, because it really gives us an inside story that we may not necessarily read, in the regular daily newspaper or see on the 6 o'clock news.
Great information, real-time information, up-to-date, insightful reporting on what's happening. And so I started reading it then, certainly read it throughout the campaign, and continue to read it now as the Attorney General. It's a great way to stay in touch and stay connected.
Highly transparent. It's really very important. It's a great tool, and it's something people in our business frankly cannot do without.
That they are real journalists. They know how to sift through the noise and get to the nugget of the information.
For any potential subscribers, it's well worth what you're going to pay for it. I don't always like what State House News has to say, how they might choose to cover an issue, but I admire and I appreciate the fact that they're there.
I would say it's a fun read as well as a necessary one in terms of the detail it offers and the insight into the political intrigue that goes on nonstop at the state.
Well, you can see we're very proud of the State House News. For over 100 years, it has provided nonpartisan, objective, unbiased, highly respected, totally credible news. MASSterList, the sister company, has never been accused of that. We are a much more freewheeling, last-minute kind of fun operation. It is a morning newsletter. The State House News Service relies on paid subscription, no advertising, paid subscription by the papers and various unions and so forth and advocacy groups. MASSterList relies on advertising to cover the cost of the 13,000 people who get it each morning. There is a little table outside run by Bill Bagley on New Business Guide. We started something new. In addition to the issue advertising and advocacy advertising, that very dynamic marketplace of ideas you see on MASSterList each day, and there's nothing like it in the state. we started a recruitment section, and this thing has started really, it flooded with jobs in public policy, government advocacy. So if you are looking for a change in employment in Massachusetts, or if you're looking for somebody who cares about public policy, that's the place to go. One more thing I'll mention, at the table that Bill is talking about help wanted, you'll see something called SafeRide.cab. Let me tell you why I actually created an app. I have as much right to make an app as I do to own a garage and get into thermonuclear engineering. But we thought there'd be a lot of young people, particularly young women, and there's a safety consideration, so I decided to make it work even before it launches. I was in Peru. They say, don't get a cab on the street. You got to get a hotel cab. I got impatient. I hailed a cab on the street. The guy looked a little scary. And I said to him in Spanish, I speak, okay, Spanish. I said, may I take your picture? He said, okay. So I said, well, if you're going to put me and kill me and chop me up to pieces and put me in a plastic bag by the airport, I want my friends to know who it is. And I've sent that picture to my friends. He said, okay. I noticed the Bible and rosary on the front seat, so perhaps my apprehension was misplaced. But when I came back, I asked some of our millennials, in fact, I said, let's make an app. And it's called SafeRide.cab. And it works like this. You get into a cab, you get into a limousine, you get someplace, you don't know the driver, you just take a picture, hit a button. That harnesses the power of your social network. And your friends know where you are, what time you're expected to arrive. It tracks your trip en route. And if there's a problem, if you don't arrive safely, by the way, when you do, you hit a arrive safely button. If there's a problem, your friends try to contact you, and if they can't reach you, a panic alert goes in, informs them, as well as local police authorities. If you are an early adopter kind of person, go to SafeRide.cab, and we will send you the link for the iPhone application, and shortly afterwards, we will be having Android. Okay, now on to the heart and the meat of it. It is a pleasure to introduce my good friend, Kirk Davis. And you know, that's not just blather when I say my good friend. I've known Kirk for over 20 years. I've always known him to be very passionate about local news community coverage. I met him, we sold the tab millions of years ago. He took over, he took it to whole new levels. And now he is the COO of Gatehouse, also a new media investment group. His company has 113 weeklies in Massachusetts. It has 7 dailies here in Brockton, Fall River, Taunton, Quincy, Framingham, Fall River, and elsewhere. It is a huge operation, huge impact on the economy, the culture, the politics of Massachusetts. And despite it all, even though Kirk now is a $1.3 billion company with 198 paid weeklies, 303 weeklies, 97 daily papers, it is a behemoth. Even though he's a corporate guy, I don't see him that way. He is a guy who loves community news. He has kept papers alive. Every time you read about 4 or 6 jobs being lost, and that is tragic, and that's just that is the way it is in this highly imperiled business. For every job lost, there's got to be 8 or 10, I figured out, saved. And Kirk is going to come out here. I hope he has time before he races to the airport to tell us some of the things he's doing with his company online and help local merchants thrive in a highly competitive, disrupted economy. And then Kirk will introduce our panelists and will introduce George Donnelly. Kirk, please come up here. Thank you for being our co-sponsor.
Thanks.
Hi.
Good.
Hold on, pardon me a second. I wanted to thank Pamela Chapin, who organized this right here at this facility. If you're ever having an event, they're absolutely fantastic. Pamela Chapin.
Thanks. So first of all, just a quick sound check. Can everybody hear okay in the back? Oh, great. Awesome. So as Russell, very, very good friend, one of the most energetic, inspiring people I've met in my business career. So I was delighted when he asked if Gatehouse Media, which has a very, very large presence, we're very fortunate in Massachusetts to be a sponsor of this. Very happy to do it. Part of what has always kept me so inspired about being in this industry are the many ways you give back. And I consider at the top of that list, you know, this pursuit of funding journalism in an age of considerable disruption to traditional media. And I was so honored last week, 2 wonderful events I serve on the Associated Press Board of Directors, and they won a Pulitzer last week, and we have a newspaper in Sarasota, Florida, that did some amazing journalism and won a Pulitzer last week. And right up there with Hamilton, for those of you who are familiar with that show in New York City, won a drama Pulitzer last week. So in any event, awesome stuff. I'm raising a millennial, so a little firsthand experience in my household. In preparation for making an introduction and having a chance to be here this morning, I thought, you know, I'm just going to go in the office yesterday and just do a little bit of research and see what's out there that I might be able to impart to you before I introduce the speakers. And it was interesting. I stumbled across something I really thought was a great read, especially now that so many things are top of mind with the elections and politics and all those dynamics. So I went and I read very, very carefully from the Institute of Politics survey done by Harvard University last October 30th through November 9th. So basically toward the end of last year. So fast forward today and sort of what's changed on the political landscape or how we're thinking about things. So first of all, 28th edition of this survey. So it's pretty grounded and has a very good basis for its content. Captured in this survey. Here are some interesting thoughts. 78% didn't consider themselves politically engaged. 44% thought things in the nation were on the wrong track. 37% weren't sure what direction we're heading in. The economy was the number one chief concern. Narrowly approved of President Obama, 50% to 47%. Overwhelmingly disapproved of Congress. It was at that point Trump first and then Carson leading the Republican primary preferences, while split on whether Trump was qualified, only 38% yes, 39% no, 22% didn't know, and Carson 43% yes on qualified, 17% no, and 41% didn't know. And Sanders was 41 to 35% favorite for the Democratic primary. What they were looking for most in their presidential candidates: integrity, level-headedness, and authenticity. Importance of issues facing the country when they had a dozen to choose from: job creation, education policy, health care. And in November, 63% were concerned or very concerned about government collecting digital information from their computer or phone. And the same held true for technology companies doing the same. And lo and behold, a pretty interesting development in the aftermath of that survey with regard to Apple and the federal government. Of emerging technologies, driverless cars, virtual reality, space travel, and drone deliveries in that order, but most respondents would cite none of these as really the most exciting. It was very, very split. Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, and Mark Zuckerberg, our most admired entrepreneurs. Facebook, the most dominant social account. And this was promising. Having time to spend with family and friends, one of the most important, 59%, or very, very important, but not the single most important thing, 26%, in their work life. Which is awesome. But concerning, for you personally, is the idea of the American dream alive or dead? 49% alive, 48% dead, 4% declined answer. In a Real Politics article earlier this year entitled "We're Millennials, Hear Us Roar," William Hankey and Ross Pomeroy declared this: "We want a government as efficient as Uber, as connected as Facebook, and as simple as Venmo. We refuse to be remembered as the lost generation, as some have called us. Far from it. When we take over, we're going to be remembered as the loud one." So it is my distinct pleasure to be with you today and have the chance to have our company's name affiliated with an important event to advance the discussion on how the Boston community and Massachusetts better serves our very important millennial community. And you've got an awesome lineup of speakers today, and it's my great privilege to introduce them. So Andrea Campbell was elected to Boston City Council as District 4 City Councilor on November 3rd, 2015. Her district primarily includes the neighborhoods of Dorchester and Mattapan and parts of Roslindale and Jamaica Plain. Born and raised in Boston and educated in all Boston public schools, including Boston Latin School, Andrea went on to graduate from Princeton University and UCLA Law School. Andrea began her career at a nonprofit in Roxbury, providing free legal representation to students and their parents in education matters, including school discipline and special needs cases. She has worked as legal counsel in both the private and public sectors, and prior to her election served as deputy legal counsel for Governor Paul Patrick. So please welcome Andrea. Next, we have Dan Coe as Chief of Staff to the City of Boston. In this capacity, he advises Mayor Martin J. Walsh on key issues and helps him execute his vision for the city and its 18,000 employees. Immediately prior, Dan served as General Manager of HuffPost Live, the Huffington Post Media Group's streaming network, where he oversaw operations. Before HuffPost Live, he served as Chief of Staff to Chair, President, and Editor-in-Chief Ariana Huffington, aiding in the oversight of the 700-person international organization. Very interesting. Dan, please. And last, we have Eric P. Lesser, elected to the Massachusetts Senate on November 4th, 2014. He represents 9 communities in the 1st Hampton and Hampshire district, serving Western Massachusetts as the youngest member of the state Senate. Prior to becoming a state senator, Lesser worked in the Obama White House, first as special assistant to senior advisor David Axelrod, and later as director of strategic planning for the President's Council of Economic Advisors. Lesser began as a young aide on President Obama's historic 2008 presidential campaign, traveling to 47 states and 6 countries with then Senator Obama and his senior team. Please welcome Eric. And finally, a special treat for me, because I had the privilege of working with George Donnelly many years ago. George Donnelly is Vice President at strategic communications firm Northwind Strategies, the former editor of MASSterList, and the author of The Boston Economy, Understanding and Accessing One of the World's Greatest Job Markets. He was the editor-in-chief of the Boston Business Journal from 2000 to 2014, and previously, this is where he has a little tie-in with Russell and myself, the editor-in-chief of the TAP newspaper group. He teaches a course on the Boston economy at Suffolk University and is absolutely a dear guy. So I hand it over to George Donnelly. Thank you all.
Well, welcome everybody. Good morning. I work at Northwind, as Dirk said, and when my colleagues, a couple of millennials, heard about this event, the first thing they said to me was, "What the heck are you thinking? Had an event at 7:30 in the morning." And what do you know about millennials anyway? Maybe this event isn't exactly a millennial-friendly event, but here you are. Welcome and thank you for being here, no matter what your age bracket is. Do you mind if I ask how many people identify themselves as millennials in the audience? Oh, sorry. Well, you millennials now comprise the largest portion of the U.S. population, and all of you are eligible to vote. millennials are getting ready to take over the world, and they don't like what they're seeing in the standard operating procedure in politics. And frankly, what's to like? Gridlock, severe partisanship, the incredible influence of money in politics. They're burdened with debt, and they wonder if, as Kirk pointed out, the American dream really will apply to them. So I can't think of a more important topic to get at the impact of millennials on the political status quo, and we couldn't have hoped to have a better panel to discuss it. So you heard a little bit of the background of the panelists, and an obvious first question is, given your backgrounds, your options were many. So why go into a field where most people are held, if not in outright contempt, aren't particularly well liked, and where there's a high degree of distrust and what have you. There are many other ways to make a living. Why don't we start with you, Eric? You got started early. I know.
It sounds like you're very accurately describing the State House. But, I mean, for me, first I just want to introduce myself. My name is Eric Lesser, State Senator for the, as mentioned, the 1st Camden, New Hampshire district, which is 90 miles west of here. And the home to actually a lot of millennials and a lot who would like to come home and work in the western part of the state, but are kind of struggling with a tough economy there. For me, it really began when I was very young. The town I grew up in is a small town in western Massachusetts. We were faced with a series of budget cuts after a round of local aid cuts that were actually voted on and decided in the building I now work at. 40 teachers in the high school I went to were threatened with layoff. And I remember the principal gathered an assembly, brought everybody into a room, and said that the music department, the art department, the history department, the math department was all going to face cuts. And I didn't think it was fair, frankly, that 15 and 16 and 17-year-olds should have to pay the price for bad decisions made 90 miles east. So we organized and put a campaign together of parents, students, and teachers. We knocked on every door in our town and were able to get that budget override passed to save those teacher jobs. And I remember when the pink slips actually got torn up and thrown in the garbage, it was a lesson for me that despite all the nastiness and frustrations of the political process, and there is certainly quite a lot of that, all of us can have plenty of stories about that, it still remains ultimately one of the best ways to make a difference and to help people. So I kind of caught the bug from that and learned at an early age that it is possible to use politics and the government process to help people and help your school.
Andrea, you didn't, as they say, wait your turn, did you?
Absolutely not.
And good for you. Tell us a little bit of your political biography and what got you involved after you got out of law school.
So I wouldn't say I was political. I grew up in Boston. I wouldn't say my family was political. We definitely voted. I don't know if my father at the time voted frequently. We did not go to City Hall or the State House. I remember going to the State House on a field trip when I was maybe in the 4th or 5th grade, the same with City Hall. So for me, coming into or deciding to run really was sparked after serving with Governor Patrick. And I think when you're in a space like that, where you're seeing someone who is in it for all the right reasons, and you get to work closely with him and his team, and I see some Patrick alum in the room, but get to work with some incredible folks, you realize how important politics is to the daily lives of folks on the ground, particularly people of color, particularly those who are poor, particularly those who are marginalized. And so for me, I started off as a lawyer. I came back to Roxbury representing kids and their parents in education cases, and I represented a student as young as 6 and as old as 22. And I got to see the impact I could have on them. We provide free legal representation but I always wanted to do more than that. Every time I ended a case, I knew that there was more that that student was going through, and that I couldn't actually shape the policies or reshape the policies that needed to change to make that kid successful in life. So when I get to a place like Governor Patrick's office and I get to see how policy is shaped, I decided to jump in, and I don't give myself the credit for that. Many folks had said, you ever think about running for office? It was ultimately my older brother who got in prison after serving 10 years who said to me, sis, what are you doing with your life? And I frequently tell folks this. I laughed and I said, you just got out of prison. You're asking me what I'm doing with my life? But he was really getting at, you're talking about your purpose and what your purpose is, and you're praying on these things. But what is it that you want to do? And he suggested, you should run for office. And I thought it was a joke, because when you're incarcerated, they don't promote civic engagement. But he was getting at the fact that I had unique experiences, unique sets of skills that I could bring to the political office and the political space. And I decided to jump in after a couple of friends said, you can do this. Don't focus on who's there, focus on what it is that you can bring to that space. And it's important that we occupy these spaces and that those with unique backgrounds and experiences do the same. Because when you reach out to those who normally don't engage in the political system or political process, who don't consider themselves political, they might think otherwise when they see you.
Yeah, you're a Harvard MBA. What are you doing in politics? How many Harvard MBAs are in politics?
George W. Bush was one.
But it's Mitt Romney.
And Mitt Romney, that's true. Listen, I fundamentally believe that every person is born with a very idealistic and aspirational view of how they can make a difference in society. I think it's what happens with the cynicism of politics as people get older and turn on the TV and see people making ridiculous statements that make them feel pessimistic about public service. I think what the councilor and the senator both kind of outlined is they both had either experiences or mentors in their lives that helped inspire them to realize that that idealism could still ring true despite all of the cynicism out there. I was very fortunate. My father was Commissioner of Public Health in Massachusetts when I was growing up. He got me involved in anti-tobacco work when I was younger, and a very kind of formative moment in my life was when I was part of a small group that helped enact the first anti-smoking, no smoking ban on restaurants in my hometown of Andover. And I was 16 at the time, and I couldn't vote. But being able to know that even though I couldn't vote, I could still make a substantive policy difference in my town was really inspiring for me. After that, I had the opportunity, as Senator Lesser did, to intern for Ted Kennedy, which was another inspiring experience. When I was in college at the Institute of Politics, I was a liaison at Harvard for Jesse the Body Ventura, which gave me a little bit of a different perspective on politics. And then after business school, actually, they have a program where if you go to the mayor's office, they'll split the salary of the mayor's office. So I was fortunate to work with Mayor Menino now and have what I think is the best job in the world, working for Walsh. And what I've realized, especially at the city level, is that if you really do want to make a difference, you actually can get that done in a fairly unbureaucratic way. There's tons of bureaucracy in government, even at the city level, but there's a lot of idealism in the coworkers I work with in Mayor Walsh, and it's a way of taking literally the childhood kind of dream of being able to make a difference in society and realizing it, especially at the city level. So I feel like the education I've gotten as a result of the MBA has actually only helped advance that cause, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
Let's start on the conceptual level and the broadest brush in terms of maybe the distinctions between the needs and the desires of the new generation entering and thinking about the political system and what exists. I'm very curious about your thoughts about Bernie Sanders and what he represents to you, and what is he channeling, and how is a 74-year-old channeling what seem to be the aspirations of a young generation? How do you make sense of that? How do you explain that? Let's start with you again, Eric.
Yeah, it's really been a pretty impressive phenomenon, and I think just to expand it a little bit. First, what it shows is that you ignore young voters at your peril. And we are now the largest, as you mentioned in the opening verse, the largest generation, the most diverse generation. We're also the highest educated generation. At the same time that we're the most diverse and the highest educated, we're also the first generation in recent American history that is likely to be less prosperous than the generation that came immediately before us. And I think that, you know, at the root of Sanders' appeal to young people is a sense of authenticity that his campaign permeates. And I saw that in 2008, you know, when I worked on then Senator Obama's campaign. And you can understand why young people, and myself, all of us, I think, feel this way. I mean, we came of political consciousness, really the first, the first inklings of us, starting to pay attention to politics was the Clinton impeachment, then the 2000 recount, then 9/11, then the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and of course, in 2008, the financial crisis. So it shouldn't be a surprise to people that our generation feels a little jaundiced about the political process and what we need to do to change things and to shake things up a little bit. And that's the core of his message. I do think that ultimately it's not enough to just diagnose problems. You have to actually provide some prescriptions for them. And I think that's probably ultimately where he's going to fall short, is that he's done a good job at diagnosing what's wrong in our kind of system right now. He's done a less good job at kind of prescribing the roadmap for how we get ourselves out of that mess in a way that President Obama, I'm a little biased, but I think did very effectively in 2008. He both diagnosed the issues and gave a roadmap for coming out of them. And I think ultimately Hillary Clinton is the one I view who's giving the most realistic sort of roadmap for where we go. But without a doubt, he's been very, very effective at diagnosing the angst that we all feel in our generation, and rightfully so.
Andrea, anything to add to that?
Well, I have to start by saying my household is split.
Okay.
So the love of my life is a Bernie supporter, and he's originally from Vermont. And so we talk about these things frequently. I am a big fan of Bernie Sanders, and I think his appeal is just that authenticity and sort of the plainness in which he speaks about the issues and the passion in which he does it. And that the fact that he's been doing it and talking about it consistently for years. He just now has a larger platform, so I think people pay attention to that. But I have to agree with the senator that you have to do more than that. You have to come up with a plan as to how you're going to address the very issues that you're talking about. I think what I like about Senator Sanders is he is frankly a pain, I think, in Hillary's side. And I think she has to pay attention to what he's saying. And you see her rhetoric and her messaging has changed over time since she started, which is good. At the end of the day, I think she's definitely going to win the nomination, and we have to get behind her, specifically when you look at what's on the other side, which is scary. I also, though, want to see them do more with this platform. So I look at Senator Sanders, and I think about it's not just the presidential races that matter. Looking at state by state, the legislatures in these certain states, and using this power to do something about it. We have young people who are engaged, who are active, who are ready to door knock, who are ready to get out there, to change the dynamic, to get more women into elected office, to get more progressives into elected office. So I really want to see them do something with that power and not let that sort of coalition die. And I think Senator Sanders is in the best position, frankly, to do it. And I hope he leverages all that he's created to really get Hillary to address certain things in a more meaningful way.
Interesting, yeah, Dan. So you worry there's going to be this big letdown at the nomination with all this energy and optimism and enthusiasm that's been generated behind Bernie?
I think at the end of the day, the Democratic Party will recognize the tremendous opportunity that they have here. Obviously, I don't have much more to add than what the Councilman Senator said about Senator Sanders. I mean, he has strategically aligned his platform around what young people care about the most.
whether it be feeling like the system's rigged against them or whether feeling like the crushing student loan debt is one that they'll never get out of. One other point is that because he's engaged young people, his amplification on social media is just incredibly potent. We've seen in this city and in the mayor's administration, how prominent, how powerful a tool Twitter can be. No longer is it just an expert who's cited in the paper, but anybody who tweets, and that has good and bad sides. But regardless, it has helped amplify the senator's message tremendously. But at the end of the day, I mean, we've seen this over and over again. I mean, Senator Lesser saw this firsthand when there was a significant division of two Democrats vying for the nomination. At the end of the day, I feel strongly that the Democratic Party will unite behind Senator and Secretary Clinton. And I think you will see that same energy, especially when it becomes clear, more abundantly clear, that there is a clear distinction between the two candidates. So, will some people feel disenfranchised and fall off? I think inevitably so. But at the end of the day, I think you will see a lot of excitement and a lot of enthusiasm as we get closer to November.
I want to just add one more thing. So in watching this race, and it's probably been closer than Barack Obama's, at least in terms of the democratic process and the delegates, because that's all you see is who has the delegates. It's the first time, at least for me, that I've actually paid attention to that process and questioned, who are the superdelegates and where are they and where are they coming from? And I'm finding I'm having more conversations with my friends about that and whether or not we actually have control or input on this very process, I think is a real question and something that our generation should definitely pay attention to. And I think we've sort of begun the conversation, but continuing these kinds of conversations and questioning the process itself.
It doesn't feel authentic, does it? The superdelegate process.
Just to chime in on that, I mean, one of the great ironies of our time is that in an era when we're more connected than we've ever been, people feel more detached than they've ever felt from government. And I think that the candidates who you see who have the most resonance with young people, whether it's a Barack Obama in 2008 or an Elizabeth Warren in 2012 or a Bernie Sanders now, inherently make their message participatory and empower the people who are getting involved and saying, they're turning it around. They're saying, it's not on me, it's on you, it's on all of you to participate. And people want to be challenged. Young people want to be challenged. And I think you're right, Councilor. People see this process, the superdelegates, the convention rules, this, that, and they just feel like their voice doesn't matter. And so one of the challenges for us as elected officials, in particular as young elected officials, is to really explain and say, yes, your voice does matter, but it's on you as a citizen to step up and make it be heard. And that's the root of the appeal in a lot of respects also.
Authentic, I love using that word because it suggests that there's a lot of unauthentic, non-authentic stuff going on. Let's drill it down a little bit, and old values, new values. Let's drill down a little bit locally. Do you feel like there's a traditional paradigm, political paradigm that prevails, let's say, on Beacon Hill? And do you make a distinction between old politics and new politics? And if so, how so?
I'll go ahead. Beacon.
Go ahead.
No. I'll speak to this. It's interesting because I'll be interested to know what the council and the senator's comments are. But Boston is undergoing, I think, a fundamental shift in the public sector and politically, where we're becoming more diverse. We recently became, I think, a few years ago, a majority-minority city. Our elected officials are becoming more diverse. Not just that, staffers in the State House and City Hall are more diverse. Mayor Walsh has appointed the youngest and most diverse cabinet in the history of the city, and that has resonance all over the city. I do think, though, that there is an old guard that still exists. That it's very interesting the diversity of reactions you get from that old guard. I think the more, in my opinion, the more shrewd people treat me like the mayor's chief of staff. But there are many people who simply won't call me or return my phone calls because they don't like the fact that at the time, a 29-year-old kid was calling them about an issue they would rather talk to a 47 or 48-year-old mayor about. At the end of the day, I can't worry about that. My only way to solve that is to get older and time to take care of that. I think what those people don't realize is detrimental, right? It's detrimental not just for the immediate relationship that I described, but it's detrimental not to involve the next generation, right? Because at the end of the day, with the united enthusiasm of the old and new guard, that's the things that get done the most, right? So it's interesting for me because it's not like I haven't had a blatant example of someone saying you're too young, so I'm not gonna talk with you. But it's almost like you can almost feel the kind of attitudes in people's eyes almost as to how they interpret it. It's a very interesting dynamic, and I'd be interested to hear what the councilor and the senator feel as well.
Old and young.
Definitely exist. Those labels exist. I felt it during the course of my campaign, and I felt it early on. District 4, predominant districts of color, but those who come out to vote are the seniors. So I knew that in order to become the next District 4 City Councilor, I didn't want to just engage the seniors, I needed to engage these other generations of folks. But it was not uncommon if I went to a door and met someone who was older, and I called my elder, that they would say, I just think you're just a little young. I don't know that you would understand the issues. And they would sort of look at me and say, oh, you know. But at the end of the day, I didn't focus on that, and I didn't focus on that paradigm. And even the media tried to shape it that way, you know, the old guard versus the new guard. And I would say, who is the new guard, and what does that even mean? So we pushed back on those distinctions and those labels, and said at the end of the day, these shared a lot of my story to build that trust with those residents. So they could see me as, one, I'm actually have more in common with you than you think, even though our ages are different drastically. They also began to see, I think, in me their granddaughter or their son or their neighbor's child or something like that. So in focusing on doing away with those labels and what we had in common, we were able to really build something special. So our volunteers weren't just the millennials or younger folk. There were also seniors who came by frequently, who would come in almost every single day at a set time to make phone calls. And I think we continue to try to operate in that space of doing away with old guard versus new guard, all these labels that people look to attach and say, at the end of the day, we have more in common than we think. And it's just a different way of thinking about things. It's a different mindset based on a different experience. And that I understand. You know, many folks are born in the 20s or 30s, or particularly in District 4, came up from the South through the Great Migration. So if they feel as though, one, you're authentic and that they can trust you, and that you understand or have taken effort to understand their experience, the commonalities and the differences, that's what matters the most. And I think I push back on those sort of labels and how people would frame it. I think we can frame it very differently.
Eric's been waiting for this question. He can't wait, because when you talk about old guard, what do you think about? You think about, well, you think about the State House.
Yeah, well, so just for a little bit of context, I ran in a 5-way primary for my election last year and had a competitive general election as well. It's a little bit more of a swing district in the western part of the state. A lot of the candidates I ran against, in fact, most of them were my parents' age. And my district is actually 60% of the voters are over 50. So it's a district with a lot of seniors. And I would, knock on doors a lot, and similar to the experience that Andrea is describing. But you would kind of come to a door, and somebody would sort of ask, well, how old are you? And we talk a lot about, and we should talk a lot about diversity. There's a lot of forms of diversity, and one undeniable aspect of diversity really should also be age and representing people at different life stages and different kind of conceptualizations of where they fit in the economy. People with young kids, older kids, people putting families through college, people supporting elderly parents. I mean, these are all life phases that deserve some level of recognition and representation in the system. And one thing I would say is when you're young and you're trying to kind of break in, you have to take the system on a little bit. And so if someone would say, you know, in a debate or something like that, oh, you're young, you know, you're not equipped to make these decisions, you don't have enough experience. I mean, I kind of get right into it, and I'd say, well, you know, if you think that the system of wait your turn and go along to get along, and next up, first out, has served us well, has served Western Massachusetts well, then frankly, I'm not your candidate. But if you think that we can maybe, look for something new, if you want to maybe take a chance on a different way of doing things, on some different perspectives, on a different approach, then I encourage you, to give me another look. And back to the theme we had about authenticity, you then have to back that up with some specifics about what you want to do that's different than the other people in that race or the other people in that room or whoever. And so that's what we tried to do. And just a point about the State House and kind of, I know we want to get to the next question, but it's really an incredible institution. I mean, there are so many people there who are so committed, who work so hard, and really are doing quite a lot. But now, after about a little over a year being there, one thing I've kind of diagnosed about the kind of old guard and what you've said about changing things. I was born in 1985, Dan right around the same time, and we were all kind of born around the same time. Since 1985, basically every single segment of American life, of life in Massachusetts, has fundamentally changed. The way we communicate is different, the way we work is different, the way we socialize is different. One place that is not different is the State House, and for better or worse. Some aspects are nice. You don't want to remove all the great paintings and everything, but my point is that sort of culture of how
the marble steps are nice too.
Yeah, the marble steps are nice, but the culture of how people interact with state government, how they share information with state government, how state government interacts with citizens is basically the same as it was in the 1980s. And so we've got to work to change that. And just a small anecdote on that, I mean, it's now been fixed. Our Senate President and the Governor worked to fix this, which is great. But very first day I was sworn in, have all the hoopla, families there. They all leave. I go back to my office to get set up, and what's the first thing any studious millennial does when you're getting ready to start work? I whipped open my MacBook to get started and realized that there was no Wi-Fi in the State House. And nobody thought that this was like a crazy thing. I mean, I was like, every Starbucks in America has Wi-Fi. How can like the seat of government for one of the most tech savvy states in the country not have Wi-Fi? So, it got fixed recently, but it's kind of shocking, frankly, that it took until 2015 to install Wi-Fi in a building that employs several hundred people.
Where does that sensibility about the rules and regulations tie into, say, the Uber controversy? And because that strikes me, we don't have a bill yet, but but we're looking at what seems like some significant regulation that very well could take some transportation options away from the people, millennials who use it probably the most. Are there any thoughts about that? Uber as it ties into values, younger voter values versus more entrenched values?
I think that there is no better kind of case study as to Senator Lesser's suggestion and encouragement of age diversity than the question of Uber. At least I'll speak purely for the city, but Mayor Walsh, now he has a driver. But even when he didn't use Uber. He knew what it was, but he didn't. I don't think he necessarily knew kind of how incredible the technology was just because he wasn't a user. And I remember sitting on his porch one time and kind of taking out the app and being like, okay, it's 2 or 3 minutes for Uber to come right now. And he was blown away because he lives in deep Dorchester. It's not like downtown where you can flag cab everywhere. And I was just kind of emphasizing to him how important this technology is and how important it is, not just to young people, but to a lot of people who get around the city these days. I think if you were to fill an administration with people who have never used Uber before, I think you'd have very different legislation in the Hill. I think you'd have very different regulations in the city. And I think that's just a case study. There's so many other examples that we could talk about, but it's a case study as to why you need, diversity of people, both from a race perspective and from an age perspective, because those experiences help inform what is the most inclusive and progressive policy you can do, and in our case, for a city.
I mean, I agree with everything Dan has said, and as someone who takes the T, and sometimes the T isn't the most efficient, and so you have to hop in an Uber, it's important that people who are shaping policies actually experience the things they're trying to shape, and I think that's true for anything you try to do in terms of policy. One example is Airbnb, and we had a councilor introduce a resolution in support of a bill that's in the State House. And there was this assumption automatically made that all the councilors would support it, and it was looking at taxing Airbnb and similar services like hotels. And immediately I said, well, wait a minute, as someone who's used Airbnb, is that the best way forward? And I was happy to see some other councilors who object to passing this resolution without it going to a committee, but it was the younger councilors who I think also use the services. So it's important that, one, we occupy these spaces and talk about our experiences, and that people don't make the assumption that we're all sort of aligned. But it was very interesting and a little contentious at a moment when this councilor thought that everyone was going to sign on to this resolution. But I won't go out, let the senator talk a little bit more, since a lot of this is in his purview. But Airbnb, new technology, it's not just us using it. I know many folks who are employed by these services, particularly people who were formerly incarcerated and not for violent offenses, but it's a living wage that's provided to them, and they're reshaping their lives. So these are other things that we have to take in consideration when we talk about these new technologies and the power they have as employers to really shape the lives and reshape the lives of many of those who really need it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I'm the vice chair of the Financial Services Committee on the Senate side in the legislature, which has the legislation right now, and the Senate's working on a draft which we'll have out.
This Airbnb?
No, this is for Uber. Okay. I mean, what's been said is exactly right. This is less a Democrat-Republican issue and more a who kind of benefits from the current system and who's challenged by the emergence of the new technology kind of issue. And it's interesting to see the breakdown. I'll just give one small anecdote from this. On the hearing we did on the Uber legislation, which at this point was several months ago, a while ago, it went for hours and hours. And look, I have a lot of sympathy and empathy for cab drivers who have found themselves in a tough situation. My father was a New York City cab driver when he was working his way through school at City College in New York. And but it was clear to me that a lot of the people kind of asking questions at this hearing had never used Uber before and really had no idea what it was. And I think as soon as you use it, you realize, and it's not just Uber, it's Lyft and all these other technologies, you realize that this has really opened up quite a lot of value and quite a lot of opportunity for people. I'll just give an example. I mean, my perspective from Western Massachusetts, again, we're 90 miles west. We don't really have cabs in Springfield, Chicopee, Longmeadow, East Longmeadow, Ludlow, Belchertown, Granby, the communities I represent. I have some towns that don't have a stoplight, but they do have Uber and Lyft. And this opens up tremendous opportunities. And so we have to ask ourselves, when we're confronted with, big public policy questions like this that kind of scramble the framework that we all kind of sometimes fall into about left, right, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative. What we have to kind of always step back and ask ourselves is, what is the public benefit at stake? And what creates the most public benefit for the most number of people? And that's the question that we have to ask ourselves. And that's kind of the rubric I've used for attacking an issue like this. And it's undeniable that the ride-sharing technologies, the gig economy kind of work is unleashing and scrambling entire new opportunities for people, both consumers and employees and employers that we never really thought possible even just a few years ago. And we have to have a do no harm type of approach. The last thing we need is government stepping in and stopping that process. We need to make sure it's safe. We need to make sure it's done responsibly, but inhibiting that technology and that shift will do a lot of damage to our state and will do a lot of damage to a lot of people.
Yeah, what would it say about Massachusetts, given that it's a technology leader?
Well, yeah, I mean, exactly. It'd be a little ironic if, the state that is supposedly and is at the forefront of a lot of the technological progress and innovations, not only in our country but in the world, suddenly screeches to a halt. A technology that is both very popular here, it is still going to be used in the 49 other states all around us, and in all the countries, frankly, all around us as well. I think it sends the wrong message. I think we need to be encouraging more technology and more innovation, not stopping it.
One could say, though, that even as a technology leader, we still put people on a public transportation that was state-of-the-art in 1915. So that's something else. That's a question for another day, perhaps. Let's talk about the economy, because that's a top issue among millennials. And to me, I think about it in a lot of ways. One is just how much at risk is Massachusetts in terms of effectively inviting the next generation workforce to migrate elsewhere because they cannot afford to live in Boston. And since it is such a pressing issue, even though there's great economic opportunity here, there's also an awful lot of economic pressure, especially when you pile on student debt, et cetera. Is the political system paying attention to millennials the way it should, and what should be done in terms of the economic issues that millennials face? Start with you, Andrea.
The political system is paying attention. I think as you have more, I hate the label millennials, younger folk in these spaces are paying attention. As someone who has student debt herself from law school, and was in that space of, do I stay in the private sector, do I go into the public sector? And frankly, when tragedy happens in life and you have some traumatic things happen, you sometimes take leaps of faith. And so I decided to go into the public sector, even though I had and still have tremendous student loan debt, not from undergrad, but from law school. So when thinking about policies and thinking about things at the council, I think about my own experience, but also those of my peers. And so we filed a couple of things. I mean, we talk about the Community Preservation Act right now in the council, and this is an opportunity to generate funding not only from residential homeowners, but particularly commercial business owners, to generate funding for what? For more affordable housing, and then historical preservation, open parks, for really that housing piece. And affordable housing for who? I often want to say we maybe want to change that term, because I get folks who are like, well, we don't need more housing for poor folk. I'm thinking, no, it's not for quote unquote poor folk. It's for middle income people. It's for city employees. It's for younger folks who are graduating from college who want to stay in the city of Boston but can't afford it. So working on things like that, I filed an ordinance with Councilor Presley looking at getting the city of Boston to prohibit employers from using credit scores and credit reports and consumer reports and determining whether or not to hire someone after hearing from constituents that that was happening, and looking at consumer reports and saying, this is usually a consumer report, the majority of things in there are related to medical expenses, the negative things, or student loan debt. So who does that affect? Millennials. So there are a lot of creative things we can do, but I think it starts with this idea of looking at my own experience and those of millennials who share my experience and saying, there are policies that we can introduce to make it easier. But I think there's a little bit more here. So I'm born and raised in Boston, and I have a lot of friends who are born and raised in Boston who aren't excited to come back to the city of Boston. So I look at particularly my friends and friends of color who have chosen to choose places like Chicago or New York or Atlanta. And I think we don't frequently talk about this, but they're choosing these places because they don't necessarily feel connected to the fabric of this city. They don't feel as though there is a space for them. And I think when you have millennials like us in this panel coming together, we talk about these in very authentic and honest ways. So it's not merely policies that produce more housing. It's not merely policies that produce more jobs for young folks. It's also looking at the social connectivity of our generation and seeing how important that is, that we come together around issues. So we were talking about maybe this wasn't the best time to do this, maybe we do this in the evening when we get more people. But that's important, that connectivity piece, because it's not easy in these spaces, being young, being new. So we rely on each other across different, whether it's the state house or the city council or people in other municipalities. We rely on each other, and that's a big piece of it too that we need to think about as a city, as a Commonwealth. How do we create a different sort of social connectivity spaces for young people to participate?
Any ideas in that regard?
Well, I mean, some of it is having, I mean, there are a lot of nonprofits or organizations or people who just come together and saying we're going to have social hours or we're going to have functions in the evenings to talk about issues we care about. So I think there's some people that are doing really well. I know for me, I hired a relatively younger staff, and we constantly talk about how do we engage that younger generation in our community, and that it doesn't necessarily need to be distinct and separate from what we do with our seniors, but that we create these spaces and make it easier for people to access them, not just in the Seaport area, not just in downtown Boston, but also in Dorchester, Mattapan. I live in Mattapan. Mattapan is fantastic. You look at the media and people are like, oh, Mattapan, you live in Mattapan. And I go, I love Mattapan. And there are a lot of incredible things happening even in that community. So really opening up other parts of the city to bring that social connectivity even into those spaces is equally important.
I think one of the other things about this, we often talk about, how do you institute new legislation or systems to help people get a job. I think one of the things, at least I'll speak for myself, that I saw kind of firsthand in the politicians that I have worked for is not just those high-level things, which are very important, but the valuable time we need to invest for the one-to-one connection from job to person, right? And this is not, I want to be very clear, this is not patronage of people who worked on campaigns. This is, an advocacy group having a very promising young person, making sure that they can get connected because they've always wanted to work for, a company in Boston and having them get that introductory conversation. It's, and I've seen this happen from as low as an everyday kind of internship that's unpaid to a high-level job. The best public servants are the ones who realize that yes, legislation, all that is very, very important, but they need to be active connectors and conveners for people who are looking for jobs and making them and kind of forcing them into opportunities that maybe scare them, that challenge them, but get them to that employment, and those people bring the next generation up. And I think especially at the city level, you have to be very conscious and tactful about that, because at the end of the day, it is so prominent in what you do, because in the city level, you're constantly interacting with people every day, touching those people who can't find a job, who've always wanted to work somewhere, who always want to be in a certain industry and just don't know the right people. So I think the legislation and the systems are really important, but the people who are in powerful roles, who spend the time to make sure that they are helping their constituents, not just with picking up trash every day, but helping them in their career path, I think is crucially important. And I think we are all familiar with the kind of public servants who do that, and there are also public servants who are interested in getting in the paper and introducing big bills, but then stepping away, maybe in their heart knowing that it'll never pass the appropriate places. And that's really critical, is the tactical one-to-one connections that will help people get on a path that those people then help the next generation.
Before I get to you, Eric, I just want to, we're going to turn to the audience in a minute for questions. So if anyone has questions, please. We already have one question. Awesome. 2, 3. All right, we're going to get to questions. Again, brain drain out of Massachusetts, and if you would have a different perspective.
No, it's a very big issue, and the economy kind of permeates everything that we do. And to sort of move it a little bit beyond just Boston, something that we've learned from these engagement sessions we've done all over the state. We've done it in Springfield, in Amherst, in Lawrence. We have one coming up in Lawrence. We just did one in Fall River. We had one in Paxton, in Worcester County. is, you know, a lot of the buzz and the media attention is on the sort of hoodie wearing, sort of, you know, tech 20-something, and the sort of popularized notion is that our generation is kind of in good shape, and everyone's a .com, you know, it used to be .com billionaire, it's more of a Gen X reference, but it's like an app, you know, an app developer and like living large in Kendall Square or something. And the reality of it is while we're a very hopeful and optimistic generation, one of the themes that we've really learned and that we've heard in these sessions is that the sort of fundamental bargain that our parents had, which is that you kind of work hard, you work your way through school in the summers, you pay off, you pay off your tuition by, you know, working in the summers and working at night, and then you can get a good job and settle down. It's just people don't believe it. And some of it is because it's daunting and scary, and that's always how it is when you're young. But some of it is because the deck is really increasingly stacked against being able to do that. I mean, it is basically impossible now, without help, some sort of help, whether it's scholarships or financial aid, to pay your way through college with no prior savings, through, you know, painting houses in the summer and working at ice cream stands and like doing all the things that all of us have done and that our parents all did. I mean, that is basically not possible to do that and graduate without any debt. And, you know, people are entering a job market now that's increasingly competitive, that's increasingly stratified, where the growth is highly concentrated in certain parts of the state and almost non-existent in other parts of the state. And so the question is how do you kind of crack that, and how do you open up as much opportunity as possible to the most number of people in this generation? And we've got to get to it's, you know, what Dan just mentioned, I mean, we've got to get to the heart of the issue here, which is, you know, student debt and loan issues are a generational issue for us. I mean, it delays marriage decisions, it delays housing decisions and entering the housing market. It crowds out investment and spending and all kinds of other things that are very important. Housing costs are another incredible drain. So these series of issues need to get looked at from the prism of, you know, a young person trying to get their start in life, trying to break in, trying to enter the economy, trying to become a tax-paying sort of productive citizen. What are all the things that they're facing? Well, some of it is just inherent to being 22 or 23 years old, but a lot of it is the conscious decision of public policy that we have made it incredibly hard for a young person to get started. And I think a lot of our policies, when we talk about economic opportunity for young people, for the millennial generation, have to be targeted at that. And it can't be focused, again, just on the app developers. We've got to think about manufacturing. We have to think about positions in healthcare or in more traditional community college initiatives, things like that. And I think once we get at that, we'll begin to see some movement on some of the other issues. By the way, just a quick thing on housing. I know we're with two esteemed leaders in Boston who have done quite a lot, both on housing issues. Great way to solve Boston's housing crisis is to work on an east-west high-speed rail line between Springfield and Boston. We have perfect exchange. We actually have great housing stock in Western Mass, and we welcome you with open arms. And the city and the greater Boston area would benefit quite a lot from everyone that would be coming on the train. So it seems to me like a great trade.
Well, I'm laughing because I have an uncle who actually lived in Palmer for a little bit, in Ludlow, working at a couple of courts out there, and who wants to go back, and so he supports that.
It's going to happen. The question is when it's going to happen. It's going to happen. So questions from the audience. Sir, you raised your hand boldly first, and you sat in the front row. So that gets you special points. Go ahead.
Wonderful. We're talking about authenticity, and I'm sitting here, I'm a psychologist. I'm sitting here and I feel the authenticity that you have. You keep it real, which I really, really appreciate. I'm trying to figure out the gap between the polls about millennial support for Bernie Sanders and his quote-unquote political revolution and elected public official millennials and their vocal support for his agenda or him as a candidate. why is there a gap between millennial voters and millennial elected officials, do you think?
Well, I think I love Bernie. I like Hillary, and I'm going to say it, and I'm looking at my staff here. I support Hillary because I'm a realist at the end of the day, and I look at how things are sort of, well, the cards are stacked up, and she is going to get this nomination. I'd be shocked if she didn't. And that's where the questions about the superdelegates and the process have really pulled me in. I really asked those questions because I'm thinking, who are these superdelegates and how does that happen? Bernie, I think, when I look at sort of the rhetoric and I hear him, I want to see more of the details. And it reminded me of my own campaign. So when I was running, I had a lot of people say, you want to do this, you want to do that, that's great. How are you going to do it? So over time, I ended up putting that in writing. I called it the District 4 Plan. And so in talking about affordable housing, I campaigned on the Community Preservation Act. I had heard about it. I knew other municipalities had adopted it. I did my research and I said, that is one way the city of Boston can generate more funding for this issue, for this crisis that we're facing. So I put out a plan and people wanted to see the specifics. And I think, and not just older seniors, even those who were engaged in the political process appreciated the plan because it talked about how I'm going to do it. It also was a way in which voters and those who were excited about my candidacy could hold me accountable when I got there. And I think for many folks that I hear from who were on the fence, who are, I love Bernie, I like Hillary, but I love Bernie, but how is he going to do it? How is he going to make it happen? Want to see more details. And so it's not an easy choice. It's not an easy decision. And I have my fiance talking to me all the time, and I listen to him. But I say one thing I will say why I love Bernie is I care deeply about criminal justice issues. I care deeply about the criminal justice system. As someone who still has relatives that are incarcerated, as someone who has seen people leave the system and the struggles, as someone who has known folks to die behind the walls, it's a very important issue that doesn't get the attention it deserves. Forget national. And if they knew the details and the specific stories that many would share, they would be shocked. They would be mortified. And so for that reason, I like Bernie, but I don't see how it's going to happen. I don't see how it's going to happen. So that's for me the disconnect.
Me? Yeah. All right. My name's Steven. I'm from Winthrop, Massachusetts. I'm a regional manager for a luxury real estate brokerage in Boston, Cambridge, and down the Cape. The National Association of Realtors estimated that Boston and Massachusetts as a whole needs to develop 40,000 new housing units every year until 2040 to keep up with our economic growth. We're at about 3,000 right now, all of which are luxury. Affordable housing programs do not work for people with my income level, right in the middle. Lotteries don't work. We're not allowed capital gains on those properties. They're not bringing us anywhere near where we need to be. What's the plan? How do we take our assets like Western Mass and how do we include them into the fold in order to make these housing opportunities more available? I have a good income. I'm way above average, and 3/5 of my income goes to rent. 1/5 goes to food. The other 5th goes to what? I mean, what's left? I mean, there's student loans, and I break even. So where is it? That's my question. Also, Bernie Sanders. I don't know why you people don't support him. Blows my mind.
I can speak briefly about this, and the councilor can also chime in. So one of the things the mayor sought to do and had announced last year was our housing plan for 2030. Our research is a little different. For the city itself, we have a target of 53,000 new units of housing by 2030. A large portion of them, I don't know the exact number, but a large portion of them, you have the affordable housing bracket, you obviously have the luxury apartments and condos you see, is that workforce housing range. So one of the outcomes of the research we saw with our housing director, Sheila Dillon, was that if your household income under 40,000 roughly, you qualify for certain affordable housing. You make over $120,000, likely you can begin to afford some of the apartments. That's that middle ground, especially for younger people, where you're in that 40 to 120,000 range. that you're disqualified for affordable housing, which you're not there yet. We have a plan. It involves a number of things. It involves working directly actually with the unions on certain plans around housing. It's looking at what patches of land that we own that are publicly owned from the city that we've just sat on for a while that we should dispose of in exchange for a more affordable housing plan. It's a number of those different things that we have as part of that plan. I'm happy to get into.
But I mean, you can't. How do you control? You can't control the prices unless you do affordable housing, right? So how do you keep the prices from going $4,000 for a one-bedroom in Campbell Square a month? I mean, how do you stop that from happening?
Well,
We're getting priced out. I mean, the city's getting old and white.
I can. So, kind of the point I think you're making maybe about learning about. Let's think big about this, and the fundamental reason why the housing prices are getting driven out of control in Boston is because we have a system right now in this state where a relatively small, compact area that isn't even the entire city, it's actually certain parts of the city, is seeing all of the growth and all of the economic expansion, and a whole lot of other places aren't. So actually, a very short drive from right here, you can get phenomenal. Really? Yeah.
Well, the whole Lynn, Winthrop, Revere, the whole North Shore, that's my neighborhood.
Yeah,
so I understand.
Exactly. So I think one of the things our role, the state role is a little bit different than the city role. But one thing that we do need to think about is how do we crack that problem? Which is, as long as we have a situation where you have hyper-focused growth in one or two places, and lackluster to even negative growth in other places, you are never going to solve the housing problem, because you will always have a situation where everyone is trying to cram into one place, and inevitably what that will mean is the people who can afford it are going to pay whatever they can to be there, and everybody else is going to be stuck with 2-hour commutes and broken down trains and all the chaos that comes with that. So one of the elements that we've really worked on, and that I've tried to work on being a Western Mass legislator who's not kind of part of this, is let's think holistically. Let's think about the North Shore. Let's think about the South Shore. Let's think about South Coast Rail, East-West Rail, getting the MBTA fixed. I mean, Massachusetts is a relatively small state. Did you know, this was fascinating, the distance between San Francisco and Palo Alto is about the same as the distance from Boston to Providence. Think about that. We need to think about a regional approach, and that will begin to bring the housing prices down, because once people have options, that will drive down the housing costs. And even if we can begin to develop tech centers and job centers outside of the Campbell Square is phenomenal. I spent 7 years in Cambridge, but if we can develop job centers in other parts of the state, we're going to have other clusters all around the state, and there'll be housing stock to support all those workers. So that's my kind of thought on that, and that's why I think that kind of broader, we have to, of course, do what the mayor's doing, the city council is doing, those are essential initiatives. We also need to take it a step further and think about the broader kind of underlying realities that are driving the housing prices the way they are.
Thank you.
We have so many questions and so little time. You've been raising your question. Sorry.
So I'm Jillian. I'm from Generation Citizen. We do civics in schools. We think a lot about getting young people engaged. So, question for you all: how do we get millennials more engaged in politics at the city and state levels?
Well, I have a few thoughts on that. One is hire them. I have a relatively young staff, and I remember people saying, "You're not bringing in someone who's quote unquote more experienced," and I know what that meant. That was code for an older person. And I said, no, they work hard. They're passionate about the work. So it is about the jobs and bringing them inside with you, not just sort of on the outside on the campaign side, but connecting them. But we were very intentional when we door knocked. We door knocked constantly. At least in District 4, the best way to reach voters was at their homes. Most of the telephone numbers necessarily didn't work. And so when we would go and door knock a senior, we would always ask, are there other people in your household? And we would look to engage with them as well. And we would follow up. So one example, one of the young people that I hired lives in District 4. We door knocked his grandmother. She wasn't home. He answered the door. And he could not believe that a candidate was at his door on Corbett Street, Dorchester, which is an area that's known for gang involvement. And I said, not only am I here and I want to talk to you, I'm going to be back. And I did come back. He couldn't believe it. So I think it's about being authentic. It's about being consistent. It's about follow-up. And that's how you build the trust. And once you have that, he would show up. He never voted before. He voted. He door knocked with me. He never door knocked before. He became one of our precinct captains, and then I hired him. Even though he didn't necessarily have all of the expertise that you might imagine in someone you wanted to use, he had the drive, he had the work ethic, he had the passion, and the integrity. And I think, so it's about jobs, it's about true engagement, real relationships, and most importantly, authenticity.
Yeah, I mean, I think the bottom line is there's two things. I think first and foremost, you need to invite people to participate. We have a 1 in 3 council in the city of Boston. It's targeting actually the 20 to 34-year-old demographic, which is 1 in 3 in the city of Boston. It's a council of 40 people. We had 350 applications last year. We realized we had to completely change the way we did it so that we can include all of those people, not just leave 300 of them in the lurch when we choose 40. And then secondly, I think from a larger scale perspective, it goes back to what I originally said. I think that people want to believe. They want to believe that the public sector and their elected officials can and will help them, that they can be a part of it. And I think it continuously having examples of that, doing things like Councilor Campbell done, the Millennial Council that Senator Lesser has done, really gets people to confirm that hope and that idealism. The more that you can continue that, I think it really grows and invites more people.
Yeah, I mean, I think undoubtedly having younger people in positions, helps in the example Dan has set with, I guess now you're a little older, but starting at 29, a job that is traditionally not handed over to a 29-year-old, and seeing all the incredible new stuff he's brought in, and the energy he's brought into City Hall, and all the just the great things that have come out of it is a good example. I mean, I think it's really two things. And I sort of saw this in 2008 when I worked for President Obama. I've seen it on a much smaller scale in other races I've worked on, and even in my own race. Don't be afraid to challenge people. Our political culture, and we all fall into this, is you want to say yes to everything. People come to you. I have a constituent come to me about, they want a bike path, or they want a sidewalk fixed, or they want a park, cleaned up. And, my instinct is to just immediately say, I'm going to take care of it, or yes, I'll do it. But, actually what often works better is saying, well, what are you going to do about it? And how can we work together to get this done? So don't be afraid to challenge people and to bring people into the process. It goes to what Dan is saying about people want to believe. They want to believe their voice matters. And then the second piece of that is you have to give people a sense that their effort and that their voice is going to be connected to a tangible and concrete result. So for me, I got started in my local community trying to protect those teacher jobs. We worked on it. We saw a very concrete goal. We got the budget amendment, or the budget levy passed, and those teacher jobs were protected. And it was kind of a line for me of the work I did and the outcome we had. So I think if you give people a concrete sense of what their efforts can achieve and what they can mean, and then challenge them to do it, then that's really the recipe. I mean, I think it was Deval Patrick who had the line, he would say, hope for the best and then work for it, or something like that. I'm butchering it. He probably said it much more eloquently than me, but that's really the fundamental part of it. I mean, on the Obama campaign in 2008, we had a motto. It was called hope, action, change. You hope for something, you take action on it, and then you see the change happen. It doesn't happen the other way around.
We have to wrap up. We have people that we have this high-powered panel. They have schedules. This has been terrific. What a great discussion. I know we could go on, and I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank State House News Service, the greatest news organization in Massachusetts, easily. Russell Bergman, Gatehouse Media, fantastic. MCLE, what a great venue. Thank you all so much for coming, and thank our panel.
Hey, Ryan, great. See you, absolutely.
Nothing.